Hi everybody, welcome to Livewire Review. I'm Jeremy. Today we're just going to be doing a winter tire changeover. I got a couple of comments online and they were looking for a tutorial on how to change over to winter tires. They were concerned about the battery underneath, so we're going to show you how to jack up the car, how to change over the tires, and just some of the small details in between. Stay tuned. I just want to start this video off with a couple of the basics. You're going to need a couple of simple tools in order to do a tire changeover at home in your driveway. Now I'm going to be doing most of this on the hoist, but I'm going to start off with the car on the ground because most of you are going to be doing this in your driveway. One of the first tools that you need is a 1/2-inch drive micrometer torque wrench, and you're going to need it to go over 100 foot-pounds. So some of these are like 10 to 150 foot-pounds, some of them are 20 to 250 foot-pounds. A nice basic one from Canadian Tire, the Mastercraft Maximum, works fairly well, or basically any torque wrench you can get for about 20 bucks. They're gonna work, because when they come out of the box, they are already certified to the torque that they are supposed to put out. So one of the nice tips here is get one that's reversible. That way you can use one tool for the whole job. And if you have other tools, just grab a wrench, and you're gonna wanna loosen the nuts just a little bit before you put the car in the air if you do not have an impact gun at home. If you don't have impact tools, you can't get the nuts loose while the car's in the air because the tire just spins. So just a little looseness on every single nut on the tire before you get started, just like this. Loosen them off, because that way you'll be able to get them off while the car's in the air. Like this. And that way, the car is still supported up in the air. You can't drive it like this, but the nuts will actually come off when you get it up. So the next question I was asked is actually, how do you get the vehicle off the ground at home? A lot of people were very concerned about the battery that's underneath the vehicle, and I even heard about some people using a wooden block and placing it under the battery and lifting up the vehicle. Don't do this. You got to follow the manufacturer's lift points. There's always lift points on a vehicle, and most of the time it is on the pinch weld. On a Hyundai specifically, there are two little notches underneath the vehicle. I'm going to take a video right now using my phone so that you'll be able to see this. So right here, you see the two little notches that are there on the pinch weld. That shows that this is the lift point on the vehicle. So with this battery, it's actually cut out in this corner so that you'll be able to get a lift under here. There is no need to use any special pucks or any wood or any slotted pieces in between here. You can actually take the metal puck on the end of the jack and just lift up the vehicle from this point. I put a hockey puck on here just for convenience. So once you have the jack under the pinch weld or whatever the OEM manufacturing lift point is on the vehicle, you can just start to lift the vehicle. So once you have the vehicle off the ground with your jack, it's safe to leave it on the jack, but I wouldn't use that alone because the jack is actually held up just by hydraulic pressure. Now, if the jack was to fail, it would fall on you while you're working on the car. So they make jack stands. Usually a jack is actually sold with 2 jack stands when you go to a typical auto parts store, and you just set it up so that it's resting on the pin, and that way it can support the weight of the vehicle. Now, it doesn't really matter where you put this one. It doesn't have to go in the pinch weld the same way as a hoist does. You can find a subframe, you can find a control arm, you can find anything that is sturdy underneath the vehicle. That way, if the jack was to fail, it will go on the jack stand instead of on you. What I would highly recommend though is you put this jack stand under the car, let a little bit of pressure off the jack, and have the entire weight of the car supported on the axle stand. So as I showed you earlier, before you lift any corner of the car, you have to loosen the nuts somewhat so that you'll be able to get them off unless you have access to an impact gun. Of course, then if you have an impact gun, just bring it up in the air, use your gun, and pull off all the nuts. So you can actually take off this and you can just spin them off by hand as long as they're loose enough, like this. And one's just still a little bit tight, so you give it a little, like that. Set your nuts aside, take your tire off, roll the new one in, and put your snow tires on. So this is how you'll be doing it in the driveway. I'm going to put this wheel back on, get it up in the air, and we'll continue on with the demonstration. Okay, here we are on the hoist, so I'm just gonna take off all 4 tires this way. It's just a lot easier for me. Obviously, you'll be doing this 1 tire at a time in your driveway, and you'll have to do each sequence one after the other. Okay, here we are with the brakes. Every time you get a wheel off a car, you got to check everything out and make sure everything's in good shape. We always check out the sway bar links, we check out the ball joints, we check the bushings, and make sure nothing's going to come loose. We don't want any broken springs or anything in here. So just take a visual look. I know most of you probably don't know what you're looking at, but just see if anything feels loose or is making a knocking sound. And this is also a good time to check out your brakes. Make sure the rotors have a clean pattern on them. Look for contamination, look for rust, look for any sticking pads or anything like that. If you take a look inside here, you can actually see that my inner pad is in excellent shape. The outer pad's in good shape as well. We service these every single spring because if you do it in the springtime, then you get to run all spring and summer long and through the winter, and you know they're going to move. And the reason why we do it every year in the rust belt is because that calcium chloride they put on the roads makes everything stick and rust so much faster than it does everywhere else in the world. So yeah, service up your brakes once every spring and you're good to go. And just before you go to put these summer tires away, you're going to want to take some chalk. You can get this at your local auto parts store, and you're going to want to mark which tire came off of where. Not because you're going to be putting it back in the same spot, but because in the spring you're going to want to rotate these tires. Get the front tires on the back and the back tires on the front. In the case of the Kona here, it's front wheel drive, so most of the wear is going to be on the front tires. This is also a good chance to check out, see what your alignment is like. I did an alignment on this car before these tires went on here, and as you can see, I have nice even wear across the tire, and there is no feathering on the inside edges here. So the first thing you're going to want to look for is a jagged edge here on the inside edge of the tire. That means you need an alignment. I'll be showing you that on the winter tires before they go on. Okay, at this point in the video, I want to talk about torquing the wheels on. A lot of people ask me, why do you have to come back and get the wheels retorqued? A lot of that reason actually has to do with the hubs here where the wheel sits on. You have to make sure that this is clean and flat. If this has a lot of rust buildup in behind it, those flakes of rust, when you tighten the wheel on here, the flakes of rust actually move around a little bit when you drive down the road, and some of them could fall out. And when they fall out, you actually don't have your wheel pressed right up against the hub, and that torque that you set isn't going to be there anymore. So you have to drive on the set of wheels for about a week or 100 kilometers in order to get them retorqued. And what actually happens when you're retorquing the wheels on, or when you're torquing them in the first place, these wheel studs act like little springs. So when you feel that squish feeling as you're just tightening up the nut, that's actually the feeling of the stud stretching out like a metal spring. Now the reason why you don't over torque it is because a metal stud, a screw, a bolt, or a nut has a certain amount that it can stretch, and then it goes into something called the plastic range. So when you stretch out a stud, follow the OEM manufacturer's spec for torque because that falls somewhere in the middle of that elastic range. That's why you can go a little over, a little under. It's perfectly okay. But set it to the factory spec because it's right in the middle, and that means that it's stretched out. And when it's stretched out, that means you constantly have spring pressure holding the wheel onto the car. So continuing with that same theme about the hub has to be cleaned, the hub on the wheel also has to be cleaned. Steel wheels are a little bit different, so I'm going to grab a steel wheel from the back and I'm going to show you that after this. But an aluminum rim has a flat surface on the back of it. One of the easiest ways at home in order to clean this is just take a flat piece of sandpaper, put it in your hand, and you take it across the hub surface, go all the way around until the entire surface is flat. You can do this with power tools too, but you can't ensure a flat surface as you can with a piece of sandpaper. So this is very handy. See how it looks after you clean it up? That's going to stay on the car and these wheels are not going to fall off. So here I have a steel rim, and a steel rim is slightly different in how it actually clamps to the car. It's not quite as important that this is as clean as the aluminum rim. The aluminum rim has to be completely clean because of the way the studs actually hold it onto the car. With a steel rim like this, if you have a lot of rust buildup like this, it's still handy to clean some of that away so you don't have thick scale and you really do have a good hold on that tire. Now you can see here that this is not completely flat. You can see that there's these high points and that the where the nut goes is actually higher than the rest of the hub. Now because of this, a steel rim, when you tighten the lug nuts down on here, it actually takes that metal center and squishes it down. So you actually get additional spring pressure with a steel wheel that you do not get with an aluminum rim. So these ones will actually feel different on the torque wrench when you're torquing down the nuts because it's going to stretch so much further. And it's not the stud itself that's stretching, that is the final part of the torque sequence with a steel rim. With a steel wheel, the first part that you feel is actually this part of the steel rim is moving inward, so you get double the spring pressure. Steel wheels stay on fairly well because of this double spring pressure, and it's a lot less likely that this wheel is going to come off the car. So before you put your winter tires on, take a look at their tread and see if there's anything you need to look out for. Like I said, I was going to show you the alignment problem on these ones. These ones have that razor edge to them where they're wearing off in a direction like this. This is called feathering. That's because when the tie rods settle in, a lot of the time your tires spread out slightly, and that causes the inner edge of the tires to wear. If you see this kind of wear on your tires, you need to go get a four-wheel alignment. When you go to order snow tire rims, you're actually going to want to pay attention to one very important spot. It's called the center bolt size here in the middle. A lot of aftermarket rim companies are only going to line it up according to the bolt circle where the lug nuts join on. But the center bolt actually matters a lot, especially on this style of rim. Because they use an acorn nut, this is not the centering mechanism for this wheel. The center bolt is where it actually matches up to this part on the hub. So the center bolt size has to be OEM matched to this because this actually straightens the wheel as it goes on and supports a lot of the weight and the lateral forces that go on around here. If you don't match up the center bolt size, it means that your lug nuts are going to be doing all the work that the center bolt would normally do. And if you live in the Rust Belt like we do, you're going to want to put a little bit of oil around the center bolt because that's where the rim actually gets stuck and we have to take a hammer or we have to take a pry bar in order to get the rims off the car if this area is not lubricated. So a little bit of anti-seize, maybe a little bit of oil, just enough to coat right around the center bolt so that the rim will come off the car. Then when you go to put the wheel on, of course, you just tighten the lug nuts by hand because you want to get the thread started before you hit it with an impact gun or if you want to take a wrench to it because they have to sit there on the thread properly or else you can damage the thread and then you can't drive your car. So you're going to want to take your time and make sure that all the nuts are threaded on before you hit it with a tool. If you do have access to an impact gun, you're going to want to put a torque stick on that impact gun because you don't want to be doing the final torque through the impact. You actually want to be doing your final torque through the torque wrench to make sure that all the lug nuts are evenly torqued on the wheel. In a star pattern, of course, going from opposite ends and finishing off with the last one in the star pattern. The reason we want a torque stick here is because an impact gun is going to put them on way too tight and then we're in that plastic range of the fastener where it doesn't actually hold the wheel on. So if you are working at home and you have to work with a wrench and you don't have an impact gun, just put the nuts on as far as they'll go and then just tighten it and the wheel will spin on you. And as long as the nuts are at that point, you can lower the car down. You can finish torquing the wheels on. Now the next step we're going to do is we're going to inflate the tires. Now air pressure is a funny thing. You always have to set it to the tire pressure that's inside the door panel. In this case it's 36 psi, but since air pressure is an expanding gas and it does what it wants, like it has to slowly settle into the tire first. What we do is we actually set the tire pressure over that set pressure that's in the door placard and then we let it out. And the reason why you let it out is because it actually stabilizes the air. If you go over the pressure and then bring it down, it gives it the air time to stabilize and you get a better reading off your tire gauge. Now most of you are not going to have a compressor at home. And if you do, great, just get a good quality digital tire gauge so that way you can go over and bring it down. What most of you are going to have is one of those tiny little compressors that plugs into a 12-volt cigarette lighter or a 120-volt socket. In that case, again, go over the pressure, maybe have a little a stick that you'd be able to check your tire pressure after because honestly on those compressors it's usually not very accurate. And a cheap stick to read your tire pressures is probably a good investment. Another tip for this is because these are winter tires, you're going to be driving around in very cold weather. And you'll notice I'm doing this in a shop, and the shop is quite warm, which means that the tires are quite warm. Tire pressure goes down as it gets colder out. So I highly suggest, if it says 36 psi, I'm going to set it to about 38, because when it goes outside and it hits 0 degrees, the temperature is going to bring it down to 36 psi again. Now you're going to have to check that once more during the season because it's going to settle down, especially when it gets to minus 15, minus 20 out. That tire pressure is going to be a lot lower than what you set it at, and you're going to want to top it up. So this is the last step after you've got your winter tires on, the jacks are down. I'd suggest you move the car back a little bit just because when you set a vehicle down, the tires actually end up a little bit off center just because of the way the car lands on the ground. So when you back up, everything straightens up and you'll get a better torquing experience this way. Now most torque wrenches are like this one where you have to undo the bottom here and you have to turn it up to the point where your torque spec is. Now on a Hyundai, it's about 80 to 90 foot-pounds, so I'm gonna go to 90 foot-pounds just so it has a little bit of extra force on there, and we're gonna retorque this within 100 kilometers or within the week. There, we're set to 90 foot-pounds, and in a star pattern, just like when you set it up. Listen for the click if you have a click-type torque wrench. And after you've torqued all 4 wheels, these things have a calibrated spring inside them. So you have to make sure to undo it and bring it back down to 0 or the lowest point on the torque wrench. Because that way when you put it in storage, it's still gonna be accurate when you pull it back out. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. I only had a couple of closing comments. Just make sure you retorque your tires within 100 kilometers or within the week. It's okay if it's late, you just gotta make sure you retorque those tires, make sure they're gonna stay on the car. We don't want any wheels falling off this winter tire season. And another thing I wanted to point out, I tried to cover as many details as I could. It's always helpful to get a few sources of information on this subject. Like we tell our apprentices, learn from everybody in the shop. You're gonna come up with your own technique in the end that works best for you. And if you found this video helpful, think about subscribing to the channel and maybe throw us a like. Well, thanks for watching.